Good morning. For the many years where I've been a student, to the many years I've seen others teach, to the many years I've started teaching, there have always been a lot of questions that came into my mind. But before I begin sharing the most important journey through education, I have a couple of questions for the audience. Okay, the first question is, how many of us remember a teacher for the great grades we received on the subject? And if you would like to answer this, I would like you to raise your hand. How many of us really remember a teacher for all the great grades we received in a subject? Okay, my next question is, how many of you remember a teacher for making us feel hopeful when we were completely lost? Alright, if you look at how education has evolved over the last many years, today everybody wants instant results, immediate feedback and gratification. The question arises whether we've completely lost the whole purpose of sustained education that was honestly built on partnerships. Let's go back to a decade of our lives. The 2012 Delhi gang rape incident shocked all of us. All the debates on the news channels and on social media emphasized just on one thing: the shortcomings of the government. Unfortunately, none of the discussions were based on what an impact a teacher would have created on the lives of the culprits who were involved in this terrible incident. Trying to fix this issue, a year later, I decided to become an educator. And when I became an educator, I hadn't given this too much thought, except the fact that I felt it was necessary for me to get there. I traveled close to 2 hours by train to get to my school in this little area of Hyderabad, where I was working with extremely challenging circumstances. The first day I went to school, the moment I entered the classroom, I had a look at how the students were arranged. They were all packed like a sardine box. The moment I entered the classroom, a little boy came up to me, he looked at me head to toe, and he said something very derogatory. I was taken aback. But then I was told that certain questions like these are very common in the community. I could have easily got offended. But then you realize what a role a teacher can play in fixing mindsets like these. The moment I entered the classroom, by the time I could even settle, I could hear a girl scream at the end of the class. When I tried to find out what had happened, I had noticed a boy had kicked her very badly in the leg. By the time I went to fix that, there was another boy who had spat on top of another girl. I tried to fix that, and while I was fixing it, there's this little boy in the first bench trying to stack up a neat row of blades. And when I asked him what he wants to do with it, he looked at me and without a single blink in the eye said he wants to cut somebody's throat with it. And I was dealing with 7-year-old kids who were in 3rd grade. How many problems can you fix in 20 minutes? The first day was a disaster. A disaster to an extent where I felt that doing this was not possible by one person. I went home, I broke down. But however, we all know as teachers, it's very easy to work on situations that you know is not in your way. And I took it up as a challenge to do it as well. I made a list because I had to start somewhere. I made a list to find out what these kids are probably missing out that the other kids from top-end schools had. A good classroom, maybe. A usable washroom, definitely. Safety, games, sporting activities, a lot of love. So I made this list and I asked myself, what are things available to my kids that I can immediately provide, and what are things that are not immediately available? And then the same evening, I put up a post on social media that went viral, where I requested all my friends and relatives across the world to generously donate to my classroom. And I told them, all the money that you're going to put into my classroom is going to be put into good use. The moment this happened, a lot of students in my classroom started getting excited because they knew there were some positive changes that were about to happen. The first thing is, we had to make sure that everything was incentivized. You know these kids, they believe everything. The moment you tell them something, they'll agree to it because it came from a teacher. So I told them, if you're going to use all these facilities, you're going to behave. And if you want me to take you for a sports class or if you want me to show a movie to you, or if you want me to walk home with you, it is possible only upon incentives. Keeping that in mind, the first outing we had was when I took my well-behaved kids to the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. This was an excellent conference, and I knew these children would have a great time interacting with a lot of students. The best thing that we could do at that point in time is make these kids come back to school and talk about their experience, forcing others to behave as well. Slowly, we were able to transform classrooms, we were able to transform a library, and luckily for us, there was a small ground close by where we were able to immediately start sport activities. Remember, these are kids who had no access to any of these all these years. Eventually, because of this, while it was incentive based, violence in my classroom came down to almost a zero level, and indiscipline in class mostly came under control. However, there were other students who decided to take up an extra step and become leaders. So one entire night I started making monitor badges for all the students in class because they wanted to show that they could lead a classroom. And mind you, all this happened in 3 months. While all this seems to be all right, we knew the journey ahead was never going to be smooth. There were challenges around health of children, poor attendance, poor peer influence, and most importantly, abuse. While at this point I had the confidence that I could deal with most of these issues, I knew there was something I'd never signed up for. These two children, Habib and Wasi. These two children, roughly about 7 years old, had never been accustomed to quality education. They were known to have severe learning disabilities. Habib was a child, the girl on the right, was someone who would never finish her work on time, and she was often punished in her classroom. Wasi was a very naughty kid who would never listen to a teacher. He would often get distracted and run out of the classroom. This is something I'd never signed up for. The next question is, if I had to build an inclusive setup where everybody had an equal chance to learn, where would I start? So initially we started with very small activities, but I knew that it wouldn't work if I were to make them sit with the rest of them in class. So what I did was, I made them sit for an hour after class and started simple activities that were a little nice. The first thing that I did was had a simple activity where students started recognizing alphabets phonetically by a simple activity. They would do this every single day for the next 2 years. Simultaneously with this intervention, Wasi decided to read his first sentence in 3 months for the very first time. Very good. Very good. This happened close to 3 months of continuous intervention. While Wasi started reading for the very first time, something miraculous happened with Habib too. Habib started learning how to subtract for the very first time in her life. While this was one end of the spectrum where my slow learners were showing progress, the other end of the spectrum had seen incredible progress. Some of the students in my class had already made smaller groups to help young kids like Habib and Wasi pick up and get to the level as quickly as possible. Because the question was never if, but when these children will get on par with the rest of them in class. Having said this, we had an incredible first year. All the violence had stopped, all the indiscipline had come under control, and from a violent classroom, we had moved towards becoming an achieving classroom. This is how the children reacted towards the end of the first year. They decided to play together, they decided to work together. These are the kind of answers we received from students who couldn't even recognize alphabets in the beginning of the year. We integrated values into every single thing that we taught. If you can read this, it says, what would you do if you were the stock? And the child very innocently says, I wouldn't eat the fish because the fish has life too. This is how the kids got into smaller groups and started helping one another. And remember, each one of them came from a very violent background. This is what Habib did at the end of the first year. She scored a 24 and 25 in a math test. This was how she performed in something like multiplication, which was very, very foreign to her at the beginning of the year. This is how Wasi performed. He scored a 17 on 25 at the end of the year. This is how the top enders started scoring at the end of this year. This was Arsalan, who came from an extremely violent background. Having said all of this, there were also a lot of funny incidents. There was a question that said, there's a parrot in a child's house, what would you do? And the child innocently said, I will eat it because I'm hungry. Having said all of this, what I also want to tell you is when we moved into our second year, we decided to involve the communities a lot more. Home visits became very normal. We would visit homes of students, and students would become mediators between themselves and between their parents and us. One very important incident in my life was during the time of Eid ul-Adha or Bakrid. A lot of students and their families did not have enough money to buy an animal for sacrifice that year. Compassion was one of our values in our classroom. And I said, let's celebrate Eid together. If you cannot buy an animal, it doesn't mean you stop celebrating it. So keeping compassion in mind, we decided to celebrate Bakrid with a twist. The whole purpose of Bakrid was to go to the community and distribute food. So instead of sacrificing an animal, we decided to go door to door giving away sacks of rice and apples. And we did this across the entire community of Hyderabad. At the end of the whole exercise, there wasn't a single child who didn't smile. Simultaneously, this is the story of Arsalan. Arsalan got onto a stage to co-anchor a program with me at Teachers' Day in 2014. Arsalan came from an extremely violent background, but he stood there confidently and spoke in front of 300 people. And amongst the 300 people was our own cricketer VVS Lakshman. That day, Arsalan stole the show. While many great things happened over the second year, students who could not read alphabets were writing book reviews on Harry Potter. Students like Habib and Wasi, who had never got a chance to learn, were pretty much reading at their grade level. Students who couldn't count or do anything with respect to math were clearing 2 levels of math Olympiad exams at grade 4. This was a small lesson of how the classroom got transformed over 2 years, from being an extremely violent classroom to a classroom that was full of joy. This is a planet we live in. This is a planet we live in. Sana. And to how group activities made a lot of difference. One up. The remainder is 0. The remainder is 0. Tell me what year will it be? And towards the end of it, we also had a reflection session on what the students felt was their experience with my role as their teacher in their life.
When Varun was not there, I cannot speak English. I was not knowing what is dream. Also, I was not knowing what dream is. When Varun come,
So he was speaking about the time where he didn't even know what it was to dream. And he says, I'm able to dream. And he eventually wanted to become a cricketer. I had to find out what he's doing right now. But it was a good start to begin with. Having said all of this, let's go back to that question I had when the disastrous gang rape incident took place in 2012. Imagine if every classroom had a teacher who was committed to push children to a very different level. Could we have stopped the gang rape altogether? The question is always a yes. This is what a teacher can do in a classroom, and this is what teachers are expected to do in a classroom. What did I learn towards the end of the whole program? I learned that every classroom is filled with untapped potential. And if once you tap this potential, the world's future is going to be India's future. Having said this, this was my classroom at the end of 2 years, and I always believe that a strong teacher, a passionate teacher, when building excellent relationships and values with children, can make a huge difference. After all, there are indeed two important days in our lives. One is the day we are born, and the other is when we realize why. Thank you very much.